Good morning folks, and welcome to the workshop of Armitage Leather. We're going to be making a pouch. Who doesn't want to make a pouch? This is just one video in a series of videos looking at pouches specifically. All the designs and templates, totally printable, and you can print off the designs. They're in the pack, glue them to card, and you can work from them. There's a whole video on your template, so you can have a look at that. You can go to my website www.armitageleather.com/shop, and it's £12 to download the pack. It's 40 odd pages, crammed full of information. If you print all the templates off, and some of the pages you have to print twice because there's a duplicate for different ends, you'll end up with 10 different designs of pouch. Now, if you were to use this pack just to cut your teeth, fantastic, you're going to learn so much. The video is going to help, the pack's going to help. If you want to make bushcraft items, perfect, you can make these pouches as intended, make 10 of each one, take them to a show, sell them, fund your craft. Awesome, and kudos to you for that. Your other option, and this is where I'd like to lean you towards, is to look at the value of the techniques contained in the pack and the videos. Also in the pack is a large explanation on increasing the size and looking at your seam tolerances of each pouch to turn it into a larger pouch, a bag, whatever you want it to be. So it's looking at taking that skill set and transferring it onto bigger items once you're comfortable with your techniques. So if you struggle with any of the techniques needed to make this pack or any one of the packs contained in the series of videos, you can go to my Vimeo channel. It's an online resource of multiple videos, not just on the pouches or the techniques using the pouches. It covers a whole range for many different items. All the tools and materials used in the videos to make these pouches are listed at the back of the pack. They're all hyperlinked, so if you keep the pack online, you can just click and it'll take you straight to it. If you have any questions or see any glaring mistakes, drop me an email, let me know, I'll adjust. In this video, we're going to be looking at the 1 ounce tin, full gusset pouch with belt loop. So, print off your sections of your pack, get your templates trimmed out, glued to card, cut, and we're good to go. We've had a good play with pouches so far. We've looked at the flat pouch, round. We've then taken exactly the same pouch and we've added a gusset to it, giving it volume. We've then looked at the 1 ounce tin pouch, which also takes the Altoids, and we've looked at the short gusset pouch, so single item pouch. And again, this can be increased in size to use for other items, but we're going to change it a little bit. And what we're going to do is still going to concentrate on the 1 inch pouch, because size isn't an issue. It's not about making it for the pouch, it's about looking at the techniques, and then you can increase the size of it. Because if we start looking at making a bag this way, then it's going to take an awful lot longer because there's a lot more stitching and cutting involved. So we'll keep it small, keeping it achievable. There's not a lot of leather, there's not a huge amount of time invested, so if you make mistakes, they're not costly. It's when you start going into big projects without enough preparation and it goes wrong that it becomes costly in time and materials, and that's frustrating. So we're going to stick with this size. Now, keeping on the ethos of, so we get rid of those, the 1 inch pouch, we have the short gusset version here, but what we're going to do is we're going to take the front section, cut it off. So here's our front section. And then we've got our back section trimmed off, that's here. And we're going to join these with a full gusset. So the gusset is going to travel all the way around the outside and base. And this, we can increase the depth of it, we can decrease the depth of it, we can change the size of it. But the most important thing to remember is we are getting closer to how a normal bag is made. So if you look at the skills and principles involved in a small pouch like this, you begin to get an insight into how to make a larger bag. And the explanation on your seam tolerances of what to include when looking at sizing for a bag are all included in the pack. So you can look at this, cut your teeth, practice it, go away, make your own template much bigger, much higher, and then all of a sudden you've got a bag. So the first thing we're going to do is look at our stitching. Up to this point I've used KS blade punch irons. I'm going to play with crimson hide, and we're going to look, because we don't have 2 rows of stitching, we're going back to the principles of the round pouch, and we're going to start off by centering. So let's have a look at that first. I have a couple of templates full of holes and no video to prove. Carried on talking, started making holes, and had an issue with the camera. So I have some footage, but suffice it to say, I will talk you through it. Now, if you've watched the 1 ounce short gusset, you will see me do this, but I've decided, in relation to the SPI of these, on 7 stitches per inch, so therefore the holes that I've made at the top and at either end of these slots here are at 7 stitches per inch. I've made my centre hole 3mm on the front because this is going to be Sam Brown, and I've made my pippin punch hole on the front of the flat there to accept the Sam Brown. I've then started where the centre line meets the stitch line with my first stitch, and I've then walked the line with the iron, and because it's 7 stitches per inch, it's taken me to the top hole, and that's occurred on both sides. I've then done that on the back as well. In addition to that, I've started at the centre line of the stitching that goes across, and this is where you have the option. You don't necessarily need to make the decision on whether it's going to be a belt plate or a belt loop. At this stage, you can decide that after. So you can make 10 of these, punch all them all exactly the same, and then decide that 5 are going to be a belt plate and 5 are going to be a belt loop. On the short gusset pouch of the 1 ounce tin, we put a belt plate on there, so it's horizontal and vertical carry. And just get rid of that little, there we are, it's annoying me. We can wear it 2 different ways. If we do a belt loop from here looping over back down, we can only wear it vertically. Decisions for you. It's entirely up to you. If you want to have the option of vertical and horizontal, you go for the plate. If you're happy to wear it vertically, you can go for the loop if you wish. It makes it sit away from the body a little further, and sometimes a little more comfortable if you're wearing it over a jacket. So, again, I have centred a tooth on that centre line and marked out towards the dot. Done that both on the left and the right hand side, top and bottom. So all my holes line up where they want to be. So the next step that we need to do is take our templates to the leather, where we can mark out the external size of it, where we need to put our hole for our Sam Brown, and our top 2 holes. We can even throw in the bottom centre hole as well, and we'll do the same with the back section. Let's take it to the leather. I have a piece of 2.5mm thick Lamport shoulder here. Smell that, it's gorgeous. So what I'm going to do, come as close to the edge as I can. If you've got a nice straight edge, then yes, you can bring it up. Another way of doing this would be to have a strip of leather and you cut it to length. There are many different ways of skinning the cat. This is but one of them. You choose what you deem best for you. So the first thing that I shall do is scribe nice and carefully around the outside, and this is one of the nice things of gluing our pattern to a piece of stiff card. It becomes a lot easier to mark out and scribe because the card doesn't crumple as we run it round. So we keep it still. First thing I'm going to do is a centre hole at the bottom of our stitching. I shall then do my right and my left hole. I'll stick one in the middle as well. for my bottom row stitching for my loop, left, middle and right for my top row stitching for my loop, top stitch left, top stitch right. I shall then take the pippin punch, press it into the hole and mark like so. When I take this off, all of my marks are in place. My top hole for my stitching, which will run around the outside, meeting my centre, up to the other side, meeting the top, row stitching for the bottom of the loop, row stitching for the top, pippin punch. So the next course of events is to trim it out. It's a big piece of leather. I shall make my life a little easier just by trimming off and get rid of that, at which point I shall use a rule to trim out all of my pieces. The temptation may be to try and cut it out in one go, but if we have straight lines, then you're better off following those lines, and if you can use a rule, you will have a far more consistent cut. So I will encourage you to use a rule. Now I'm not going to make you watch me cut everything out, but I'm just going to trim those two pieces, and at which point I have these two lines here. Now these two lines here are at a right angle to the edges, so I'm going to use that to my advantage. I shall pop that leather up against the spine of my rule. The leather is 2.5mm thick, the rule is 3mm thick, so I can now use a square, so I can press the rule up against the leather, press the square up against the rule, and then line it up with that end mark there, and I can see there that that's a nice line to follow. So I've drawn it out well, and I shall do it nice and gently because I don't want to move the leather, because I'm only holding it with 2 fingers. Spin it round and do exactly the same on the other side. Exactly the same again. That's a lovely line, nice and gentle with my cut. We'll score first and then we'll go a little deeper and deeper still, and there we have a nice right angle to our cut, finishing off with our taper. Lots of pressure on the rule, again nice and slow, nice and gentle with the knife. If we try and fight the leather and go through it in one go, we may move. We don't want to. Spin it round, and exactly the same on the opposite side. And already we can see the shape of our back section taking place. How's that? A direct repeat of what we've just done, and I'm going to do it from this piece here, is we can pop our front section onto there like so, hold it nice and firmly, and we begin to mark out. So we can take our 3mm punch, press that on there. The order that you do this in is entirely up to you, as long as you don't move the template once you start. If you do, then obviously you need to reconsider starting again, or is it recoverable? So I've marked the centre hole for my Sam Brown stud, top 2 holes and centre holes, and now I shall scribe around the outside with a fine scratch awl. The finer scratch awl you use, the finer the mark you make, and the cleaner the cut. And there we go. So exactly the same again. I will trim this out, so I will use a nice short rule, and to be fair, I shall just trim this out first to make it a little more manoeuvrable, and a wedge point. Now this can create a bit of rock, a little bit of twist. If you get into the situation where you're doing that, it's good to bring it to one side of the ruler and introduce another piece of leather, like so. So we have 2 points of stability for the rule. We line up, but we put the most amount of pressure onto the piece that we're cutting. We don't try and fight the leather. Draw the knife across as if to scribe. If we have to do it 2 or 3 times, more so the better. It's better to have a consistent cut in the right place than a clean cut in the wrong place. And the only thing that you will have to do is, you may have a couple of lines, is just run a bit of paper to sand it down very slightly. But it's better than it moving. Now if you notice, there's a little click. We'll spin it round and you'll hear it more so on a fresh cut. Now many of you will be familiar with a clicker's knife. Its proper name, because that's not its proper name, listen, a little click, its proper name is a pattern cutter's knife. However, in the pattern cutting sheds in places like Northampton, there were any number of pattern cutters cutting out the leather, and they were all making that noise. And when you talk about lots of people in the same place making the same noise, all you can hear is a series of clicks. So they became known as clicker sheds. The people that worked in the clicker sheds then became known as clickers. The tools that they use then became clicker tools, a clicker's awl, a clicker's knife, and so it goes. So if you draw your knife and you hear that little click, it's not a mistake. It born an industry series of terminology. So don't worry too much about not going through it in its first hit. So we have our 2 pieces. We haven't cut the gusset yet, we'll worry about that in a bit. What we want to do now is cut the corners off. Okay, now there are many tools available to do many different jobs, but very, very few to cut corners. Using a washer or a coin and cutting in a straight line, and if you go onto my Vimeo channel, I cover cutting corners in a lot of detail. But Tandy have come up with these little craft tool corner cutters, and I've got to say, they're awesome. They're not cheap, they're really expensive. They're about 50 quid each. But if you are looking at cutting a lot of corners, I would say it's worth the investment. I've got all 3 sizes and they do get used a lot. So on the base of the front section, I will be using the 01, and we pop this on the corner over that mark, making sure the 2 edges are just very, very slightly stuck over the edge of the leather, and then we trim off like so. So quick, so simple, but most importantly, so consistent. Happy with that. And we'll do exactly the same with the base of the back section. You can buy a knife from Tandy, and you can buy a knife from many different places. You can buy irons from Tandy, equally from many different places. But this seems to be the one tool that doesn't exist anywhere else. Now we're going to do the flap. So we've used the 01 to do the base, and I'm going to use the 00 to do the corners of the flap. Working exactly the same way. Pop it over a little bit, stick it over either end, and trim. And that's that done. Simple as you like, and consistent. So what we have now are a series of marks on our pieces of leather cut out. So we have our dividers set to 4mm, we have our holes. So what we can do, look at that, perfectly lining up, we can run the dividers down the edge of our leather, around those curves, meets up perfectly with that centre hole, round the other side, running it back up to where our top stitch stops there. And we'll do exactly the same on the front, all the way around, meet up with our centre hole, continue around, meeting up with our top hole. We then have our 2 rows here, which will be for our belt loop, so we can fall upon the rule here, and again we can put another piece of leather under our rule to keep it level. We can line up our rule with all 3 holes, and if they line up, then you've got it right. They do. So I will make a line with a fine scratch awl from the left hand side through to the right and stop. Move up to the top section, line up with the 3 holes. Beautiful. So we know that's going to be at a right angle because everything's lined up very, very nicely, and we are good to go. So the next thing that we want to do, and we can fall upon the reliance that our holes are in the right place. If we're not that confident, we can take our template, lay it over the top of our piece. Our hole lines up there, beautiful, everything's just right. And if we are a little unsure, we can begin to pre-mark. As long as we go through the centre of every hole, we can mark out through the template onto the leather, and we can see our series of holes there. Or we can commit and go straight onto the leather, or we can find our 2-prong, start at our centre point and work out. And what I shall do is at our centre point I will make a little bit of a dimple there, a little bit of a dimple there. I shall do the same at that point there and that point there, and then we can work out from our centre point with our irons. And again, we can walk the line. It's all about options. The more time that you take with this, the more consistent it will look, and if there's a level of consistency, it's going to look good. Yes, we can run rampant at it, go like a bull in a china shop, make all our marks, and if one doesn't line up, we've got an issue. And you can say, yeah, I made it, I'm really happy with it. There's a few issues. Let's factor out those issues. The more effort we put in front end by doing this, the less issues we will introduce. So, enough of me waffling. Let me transfer these holes to each piece of leather. So we're ready to transfer our marks into holes. We're confident that the marks that we've made are going to fit. So what we will do, using our centre mark, we will put a tooth onto that centre mark and find out if it marks up with the hole to the right. Indeed it does. And I'm only going to give that a gentle kiss, because if I get it wrong I can move it and that hole will close up, and I can see there that that marks up with the hole on the left. So I'm happy with that. Come down the bottom, do exactly the same again. So if I tilt it that way you can actually see what I'm doing, and we can see there that this tooth lines up with the centre hole, this tooth lines up with the end hole. Stand it up on the line and give it a kiss, move it over to that side, give it a kiss, and there's my marks. So I'm happy with that. So what I shall do is I shall commit. Always pull the iron out as it goes in straight. Got a good couple of mil clearance at the back using a pulling block, press and lift. And you can get these from justwood.com under the Armitage leather tool section. And again, keeping it all nice and straight. That's lovely. So, happy having used this iron on the template that the holes line up. So what I shall do is I shall start at the top right, give it a kiss, make sure everything lines up. It does, and at which point then I can commit good few millimeters of clearance, lift the iron out, take it down towards where the line begins to curve, and then come to the other side, put it back on that dot. And we can, if we're looking for confirmation, we're always looking for confirmation, we can use a square. We can put the iron back into the holes, we can put the square, because we know we've got a good edge there, up against that iron there, move it over, and we can see that if I press, that top tooth indeed does mark up with that top hole. So I've got a nice set of marks there to follow, put my iron on and commit those holes. Again, working back down towards where the straight line begins to curve around, lift out straight, and again looking for confirmation, use our square, look at those bottom two holes, and we can see that they are absolutely bang on. And at which point now we spin it round, we have our centre mark, and we can put a tooth onto our centre mark, and we can take the right hand tooth up to where it begins to curve, and we can pop that on there, making sure I'm actually on the line, give it a kiss and have a look. Beautiful. Before I commit these, I'll come to the other side and do the same. So I have a kiss there. What I can do now is walk with a two prong between these two marks, and I can see everything lines up. Do exactly the same on this corner here. So I have 1, 2 holes all lining up nicely. So I can come back to my straight. In fact, I've missed one of the holes off the end there. I can do that with a two prong. Lift it up and just finish that off. So that's the holes at the base done. Follow on down to that hole, and then follow on down to that hole. Exactly the same on the other side. Follow on down to that hole, and then follow on down to that hole. And there we go, no long or short stitches, and all our holes are made and they look the same. Happy days. So what we want to do now is count them, because it's this count here that will dictate the length of the gusset. So I'm going to go away and count these. Once I've got a number, I can then cut a strip of leather, at least the length that I need, and I can then add whatever number of holes I have here to either side of that gusset, and that is going to line up perfectly. So let me count these up, see what I've got, cut a strip of leather. I will also cut a strip for the loop as well. That's the holes made in the front and the back, and around the outside I have 51 holes on both pieces. So that's ready to go. So when I cut my gusset, I know I need it long enough to have 51 holes throughout. Now, the belt loop. We've looked at the plate in the other video, And very simply, it's a flat plate stitched top and bottom that we can run a belt through or put some slots in. But you might not have the crew punches available to do those slots. Yes, you can do it with a knife and a hole punch, but it could look a little bit shabby. Another alternative is just to simply get a plate of leather. We'll trim the corners off, we'll put a row of stitching or stitch holes at the top and the bottom, and we are just simply going to stitch the top section in reverse at the top, bend it over and stitch the bottom section normally at the bottom, and that will create a belt loop. And that's what we're going to do for that. So the first thing that I shall do is to trim the corners, and exactly the same again. And to be fair, if you give me a minute, I'll do this and then we'll come back. I've trimmed the corners off, set a stitch line, not set a stitch line, set a centre line, and what I'm going to do now is use my dividers to set a stitch line. So I have my left hand mark, my centre mark and my right hand mark on both the top and the bottom. Now you can get a little bit funky, you can run the stitches up and do a double row stitching. There's all sorts of bits and pieces you can do. I'm not going to do that for now because it's going to take too long. I'm just going to do a simple row stitching at the top, row stitching at the bottom, and leave it at that. So exactly the same as I've done before, I will find my centre mark with my tooth, making sure that it lines up with my right hand mark, give it a kiss, move it over, making sure that the centre line and the holes that I've just made line up with my left hand mark. It all does. Spin it over and do exactly the same on this side here. At which point then I will commit the holes to the leather. In fact, I'm happy with that, I can do that now. So all the holes for stitching are made. The only thing left to do is to cut the gusset. So I shall leave the edging until the gusset is cut. There we go. So we have this row of holes that line up with this row of holes, and if you're using a plate it's exactly the same row of holes, except this will be stitched this way round like so, and then this will be bent back and that will be stitched like so, and there's our belt loop. Now let me cut the gusset. It's going to be exactly the same width as the short gusset pouch, because the front, the distance from the front to the back doesn't change. It's the same distance. So we will cut a strip of leather long enough to go all the way around the outside and wide enough to take the tin and our seam allowances. So let me cut that and then split that down to about 1mm thickness. And again, if you struggle with splitting, you can buy the leather the thickness that you want. If you try and make the gusset out of the same thickness of leather that you're making the body, it's not going to work. You need a thinner piece of leather for the gusset. If you have a big bag, then yes, but this isn't. This is a small pouch, so you need a thinner piece. Right, let me cut that strip, thin it down, and then we'll add 51 holes to that to make sure everything lines up. With my strip of leather cut, thinned down, I'm going to square off one end. And again, I will fall back to the good old-fashioned technique of using a straight edge and a square to ensure I have a nice edge. Now this is thinner, the leather will move, so we're being gentler with the knife. So we're not trying to drag the leather out from under the rule, we're trying to press down and cut. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ensure I don't work to the wrong end. So with this cut, what I can do is run 2 lines either side, starting short and stopping short down either side of the gusset. So I can now, because I know that dividers are set to 4mm, I can put them on the end and press where my first stitch wants to be. That's a little short, so I can take it to that dot. Now, what I can do here is begin to add my holes. So my first hole wants to be on that mark, 4mm from the end. So we'll smack through there. 3 more holes. That's 51. So exactly the same on the other side. Go to that 4mm mark and smack them through. Right, let me finish these holes off, get to 51 on this side, and then we'll look at trimming in a moment. So I have 51 holes in my gusset. So use the dividers, find the centre of the end hole, mark beyond there, at which point we can bring the straight edge back, the square back. We'll find that mark 4mm beyond our last hole, and then we will trim. Again, nice and gently. We're not after dragging that leather out from under the square, and we don't even need to measure that. We don't need a number at all. All we need to know is there are 51 holes in that piece of leather. There are 51 holes in that piece of leather. So if we consistently stitch, starting at the first hole on both pieces, all the way around, bend it round, it will come together. Now, we can glue this, and that is the normal course of events. We would pre-prick this, we would glue this in place, and you've seen me do that any number of times, at which point then we use an awl and we go through and we make the holes up on the inside. But you may struggle with that. If you can do that, again, while you're watching the video. However, this removes the inconsistencies of the stitching on the inside. So if we were to look at something where we can see the stitching, we can see the stitching on the outside, and we can see the stitching clearly on the inside, and we can see the stitching on the inside is very, very clean. Spin it over and it's just the same on the back. If we were to look at the other little pouch, there we go. So here's a lovely dark leather with a yellow stitch. We can see we have a nice clean stitch on the front, we have a nice clean stitch on the back, but as we look inside the gussets, we equally have a nice clean stitch, and that's what we're after achieving. We don't want ropey stitching going on the inside. Yes, we may end up having it nice here and here, but if it lets us down on the inside, it's letting us down full stop, and we don't really want to do that. So if we go to the effort of this pre-pricking method, we remove that. Everything comes together beautifully. So all of our holes are made. All that's left to do now is to crease up where we're not going to stitch, bevel, slick and black. So the first thing that we will do is grab ourselves our trusty little purse crease. This is, excuse me, this is shoulder. It will crease cold. We don't need to worry about heating it up. We can do. We need to apply more force with a crease when creasing cold, because we need to press into the leather. That can present problems when going round corners like this, so we can actually introduce heat to the purse crease, so we apply less pressure, because it's ironing the mark in, if you like, and in ironing the mark in we don't need to press as hard. If we don't need to press as hard, there's less chance of us running off. Still happens, I do it. If I'm not paying attention, it goes wrong. So we start off nice and gently. You can always go back and revisit if needs must, and then take it around that corner nice and slowly, the next corner as we go, and you'll see that I'm actually moving the leather as opposed to try and physically bend round to crease, and then we can just run it up towards that end with a little bit more pressure. And there we go, good enough. We've done that, but we can apply a little bit of a hot crease to that. We'll do either side of the belt loop, exactly the same here. And we are good to go. What I will do was, while I've got a little bit of heat, I will just apply a little crease to either end of the gusset, just to finish that edge off in case somebody looks. And there we go. Next, we bevel. So we are looking at beveling, again, areas that aren't being stitched. We're not worried about any of this because all of this is being stitched. At the moment, this gusset is going to be stitched in as a simple seam, so it's going to be flesh side to flesh side and then bent round as a C. If we were overlapping and doing a lap seam like we did on the gusseted round pouch, then we'd finish it, but we're not. This will be finished once this is stitched. So the only thing that needs finishing on this piece is the top. So we'll run a bevel off the top. The belt loop sits on the surface of the leather, not against another piece, so this will be beveled entirely, so we can slick and black up the edges all the way round. And again, if you go to page 25, you can see all the information on belt loops, and you can begin to make a decision. This is very, very simple. A single row stitching top and bottom. You can do double rows, or you can do shapes, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to keep it simple. Single row at the top, single row at the bottom. Let's start somewhere. Let's start simple. And there we go. And at which point then, it's just the top and the flap. The body, again, will be stitched to the gusset, and at which point then, when that's done, all of this will be finished when it's stitched. And I will try and run a little bit of a bevel. Now I've got a lovely little tool here. I've been sent one of these and I've got some more coming. Palo Santo. Gorgeous little beveler. This is a number 1, very fine. Still having a play with it, waiting for a couple more to turn up. They're handmade, they're removable for cleaning and sharpening. Really nice, very sharp. So this is a 1mm piece of leather. You can see that does not struggle with that at all, to the point of I've got to question if it's actually cutting because it's so sharp it just falls off. But little thin pieces like this, it's gorgeous, and I can give that a lick and a slick and a bit of a black as well. So next course of action, lick it, slick it, edge coat it and finish my holes and put my maker's mark bang in the centre of my loop. So I'm going to go and do that. Again, you don't necessarily need to watch me licking, slicking and blacking up and edge coating. If you struggle, if you want instruction, first and foremost it's in the other videos. Secondly, it's all covered on Vimeo. So let me knock out these 2 holes, lick everything up, slick it down edge coat it. Then we will look at offering some stitching to our pouch, bringing it together to make it work. All our holes made, maker's mark, everything beveled, slicked, blacked and waxed. All that's left to do is add the hardware, and this is as simple as you like. From the back nige, put the stud on the right way, and we'll add the sand brown to the front. We could leave this off, stitch this on and add it after. In fact, I tell you what, we'll do that because it'll sit in the clam a little easier. So we'll come back to the sand brown stud in a bit. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to stitch the belt loop to the back section. That's going to be stitched in reverse to start with. Then we'll bend it over and stitch it around proper. The next thing we will do is stitch the gusset to the front section, and then we'll put both pieces together. So let's go to the clam and have a look at the belt loop being stitched in place. Okay, so we are going to stitch our belt loop onto the back of our piece, but we need to stitch this in reverse. So it is a case of working out which way the logo is and then turning it upside down. That's it. And we can stick it into the clam upside down, but before we do so, what we're going to do, I'm trying to do this on camera so I've not got the best visual, is we're going to line up our first hole on the plate and our first hole on the back section, last hole, and so on. They're lined up, that's going to work, at which point we can pop that into the clam, ensuring that the needles are nice and straight, and we are good to stitch. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Start off with a couple of back stitches. So third hole in, and again you're going to get bored watching me stitch this, so you get the idea. Little row stitching and lock it into place. Again, I am doing a single row of stitching. You can do double rows or get a little bit fancy, add your own signature to it. I dare say if I was actually making this for somebody or a customer, then I would go a little further with the detail. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to keep it simple and we're going to get you started. It's a single row at the top, single row at the bottom. Let me get this stitched and then we'll bend our loop over to this row stitching that currently is at the top, and we can see how it will all come together. Let's come back when that's done. So that's stitched into place. The next course of action is just to bend this down, and we will do exactly the same again with our needles. One needle first hole through both pieces, one needle last hole through both pieces, and I know I'm waving it around all over the place. I'll try and keep it on camera. There we go. And at which point then we look at locking it off. Little bit of wiggling round to get the needles in the right place, and at which point, if I have both the needles at a right angle to the leather, then the holes are lined up and I'm good to go. And as simple as that, we stitch it in place. So once again, rather than belabour the point, let me stitch this, come back when it's done, and you can see the belt loop in place proper. That's the stitching done at the bottom section. Just to take it out, spin it around, there's our belt loop, and we can see we've got plenty of space to put a good sized belt through that and stick it on something. And the nice thing about the loop is it pushes the front away from the body. This sits flat against the body and it tilts it slightly, so you've got better access to it if you're wearing big chunky clothing. a winter pouch if you like. But that in essence is what we've got so far. So the next thing we're going to do is look at the gusset and the front section. We have our front section. We've left the sand brown stud off for the time being, and we have our gusset. The reason being is it's just going to make it easy getting the clam. We're going to have enough issue stitching the front section with the gusset to the back section with the belt loop together, so we might as well make life a little easier for us. Now we need to work out which is our face side, which we want to stitch towards us. I'm left-handed, so the face is going to be to my left. If you were right-handed, you'd have the face to your right. So you work out your comfortable stitching technique to start with and just line it up roughly, at which point then we can get a couple of needles and we will line up our holes, and we'll line up the first and the last hole on the straight line before it begins to go towards the bend, and then we can pop it in our clam like so. Now, no glue. I'm not encouraging you at this stage to use glue, because we're going to have enough fun pulling this gusset round without it. If we start using glue, we can misalign it, we can end up with different edges. Let's cut our teeth on this first without glue. Once we have a success, we can move forward and we can begin to use glue afterwards. But for now, no glue. Let's just see it working. And again, I don't need to say it. Start as we mean to go on. Said it. Sorry. But let me get on with the stitching straight away. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch this down to here, then I'll come back and we'll look at it bending round the corner, because that's the fun part. That's where we're going to have more issues, and this is here is the reason I don't want you to use glue yet. So let's get there and we'll have a look at what happens at the corner. We've made it to the corner. I've changed the angle so you can see it from this end and you can see it beginning to bend. So this isn't going to go through because the hole on the gusset is travelling in a straight line. The hole in the front section is beginning to bend round. So the easiest way of dealing with this is actually take the gusset out of the clam now and have it hanging free, because what we can do is we can put the needle into the first hole and we can now begin to bend the gusset around that corner. Now trying to do this with glue is a little problematic. It's bad enough just doing with the stitching, but if we add a little bit of tension, we can see this crease beginning to appear here, and we continue as we go around the corner. Put our first needle in, bend our gusset round to line up with that hole so it comes through, and we can see it creasing, because we're asking this piece of leather ultimately to bend in two different directions. We're asking it to bend round the curve of the leather, but then bend back on itself as it stays flat and then bends up against the edge of the leather here. So it's a big ask for a piece of leather. This is why it needs to be much thinner than the body. And we continue round like that. Now the nice thing about these little pouches is this only needs to happen at the corners. When we get round this corner, it goes back onto the straight and stitching becomes so much easier again. But in this pre-pricking method, we know everything fits together. Even if those holes don't look like they're going to meet, they are. They are 3.85 millimeters apart, all of them. So if we encourage it round on the front, the back will follow, and that's how it's going to be. And then we're pulling up towards the straight on the front. So there's only 3 or 4 stitches where it gets pulled round on the back, and at which point now we can straighten it up and we can continue stitching as we go. Again, we've reached the next corner, so we'll bob that round at an angle there, put our needle in and pull our gusset down so we can find that hole on the back somewhere. There it is. And exactly the same as we did previously. Bit of tension, pull it down. Finding that hole. And this is the lovely thing about using the right needles. These are saddler's harness needles, which means the points are blunt. We don't need to make a hole with the needles. We've already made the hole. They're round, so we can seek out the hole for difficult stitches like this. And the idea is we ride that needle over the inside of the leather until we locate the hole. Apply too much pressure, we can end up cutting a new hole, and that would spoil it. We don't want to do that. So you are being quite gentle. You are in charge, definitely, but you need a level of finesse. And then, when you thought it wouldn't fit, we can see there, it will fit. So we're getting back on towards the straight, and we continue until we finish. So let me carry on and then finish this section of the gusset, and then we will look at adding this piece to the back piece, and that's our pouch, apart from the edges being finished, complete. And there we are. That is the front stitched to the gusset. And that's now ready to have the hardware added and then get stitched. The Sam Brown stud is a screw. I'm going to add that, and then we're going to look at stitching the front section to the back to make the pouch complete. There we are. That's the hardware fitted. What I am going to do is I am just going to sand and finish these edges first, because it's a lot easier to do this whilst it's single than whilst it's double. There's going to be enough issue with doing the back, but then we only have to concentrate on one. So to make life easier, I'm going to give this a little bit of a sand, bevel the inside and the out, lick it, slick it, black it up, and then bring it to the other piece for stitching together. So exactly like we've done all the others, it's just a case of giving it a sand, smoothing it off, bevel, lick, slick, and black up. So once I've done that, we'll look at stitching it together. That's the front finished with the edges. It just makes life a little easier doing it one at a time rather than doing both pieces. It's going to be bad enough with this getting in the way. So I thought I'd just clean that up first, and we can see there that that looks spanking. Now, stitching this to this is no different to how we stitch the gusset to the front section. We choose the side that wants to be our prime side, and in this situation it's going to be the back piece. This is our good stitch here. So I'm left-handed, so I will have that facing my left. If you're right, you'll just simply turn it over and have it facing to your right. And at which point, again, we are going to take a couple of needles or pins, whatever they be, one through the first hole of the back section, one through the first hole of the gusset, and we are going to try and pin everything together, and we'll go down that straight prior to the bend, and we'll add another one down there, and there we go. So we have everything pinned up ready to go. Now that obviously is quite a wodge, and we're not going to get all of that into our clam, so we are just going to pinch the back section. The issue with this is we now have the belt loop in place, so it is a case of trying to manage as best we can holding it together, and it's going to take a couple of stitches before everything comes together. So what we're going to do is we're going to go third hole first for our back stitches, and we're going to center our thread, and we're just simply going to have to hang on to everything until we've got it caught with our first couple of stitches. And again, already it's trying to fall apart, so we'll hang on to it as best we can. Next stitch away from us, and we're going to have to hold it in place. If you've got a little peg or a clam that's nice and dinky, then by all means use that to pinch it. And to be fair, had I even thought of that prior to this, I'd have probably set something up, but I didn't. Preparation, Nige. And we are going to find that hole, pull everything together, put the 2 needles again because I might have taken the centre thread away, and then lift that up, and there we are. That's going to hold now for us to stitch. A little bit of tension, beautiful, and our last hole away from us for our final back stitch, and we are good. Hold that in place so it's a good position, a little bit of tension there, tension on both, and carry on stitching as normal. No difference to how we stitched the gusset to the front section. We are going to force it around that bend exactly the same way. As we get to this point here, we're going to pick our hole, pull it in, get it right, and it is a case of continuing round. You have, I have, if you will have, may have a different number. I have 51 holes on the back, 51 holes on the gusset. As long as I stitch the next hole on both pieces, everything will line up. It's just going to work. The only problem you will have is if you have an uneven number of holes. If you've got 51 on the front and 52 on the gusset, then obviously you're going to have an issue. You're going to have to lose a stitch, but that could set out your line and begin to twist the pouch, and the whole thing can go a little bit wrong. So it's precision, it's front end. All the work you do front end, making sure that it works, will come together, and all of a sudden stitching is not the most difficult thing. The whole thing coming together like this makes stitching the easiest part, because you are just following the holes, which are a guide, and it is, if you like, stitching by numbers. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so it goes. Let me finish stitching this. You can see I'm having a little bit of an issue. You are just going to have to cope. Simple as that. It's a big, thick, 3-dimensional piece of kit, and if you're stitching a messenger bag, you end up pinching it between your knees and sticking it under your arm and doing all sorts of stuff to get it right. But it's worth persevering with. It's malleable, you can bend it out of the way, just making sure that your edges line up. Let me finish stitching the front to the back, and then we'll come back and have a look at cleaning this edge up and finishing our pouch. And there we go, all stitched in place. So all that's left to do now is give these edges a little bit of a sand, clean them up, black them up, polish them, and find out if it fits. Now, we've got lots going on here. We've got this back piece being bent in by the loop. We've got the gusset here forcing its way in there. It's going to be snug to start with. It is leather, it is malleable, it will stretch. If you feel you don't want to start off with a firm feeling pouch, add a little bit, but ultimately it will fit, it will all come together, and we're going to see that in a minute. So first things first, what I'm going to do is clean up these edges and black and slick them up exactly the same as the front. So let me give these a sand and then come back once I've licked or beveled, licked, slicked and edge coated all of that up. That's the sanding sorted. Now to give it a little bit of a bevel. We are all over the place on this. I can't stick it flat on the front because there's a big bit in the way. I can't stick it flat on the back because there's a big bit in the way. It is a case of, as best you can, working your way round. and I'm using the little anvil there to do it as best I can, and I shall do the same on the back, giving it a little bit of a squish to try and keep it flat. And it's like many of these things, it's lovely when you're stitching something flat against something flat, but as you begin to build up your repertoire and items become a little bit more complicated, putting them together gets a little bit more complicated too. So you've got to kind of find your way round it, if you like. And there we go. A little bit of a task, but nonetheless. Let's get one of the dogs to give that a lick. Ruff. I'll let you work that out. And then, give that edge a shine. And we can see the whole thing beginning to come together. And those edges, no glue at all, don't need any. You can, if you wish, add glue, but until you get a grip of what you're doing, to be fair, the glue's going to work against you. But there's no glue on any of those edges, front or the back, yet because we've got the leather forced against the front with that seam, bent at a right angle, C-shape, back up on itself, the inside of the gusset is forcing itself against the front of the leather, and that's what's keeping it together. That little bit of slicking, the bonding with the edge coat, is going to ensure that it stays together for a good length of time anyway. So yes, by all means you can look at using glue, but we can see here we can get away without it, just to get our feet under us. And that's what I'm after you doing, is getting a good old practice in with these pouches, so you've got some mileage behind you, a nice repertoire of items to make, potentially sell. If you can get your leatherwork to fund itself, well, that's awesome. And if you can use these to help with that, well, that's just awesome-er. So, little bit of edge coat, then a little bit of wax, then a good old polish, and then I suggest we find out if the tin fits, because that's always a bonus, isn't it? Making sure that everything comes together, because if it doesn't, well, that'll be just awkward. It's going to be stiff. We know it's going to be stiff by the nature of what we've just made. We know it's going to be tough. I've just got a bit of edge coat on the corner there, so I'll try and wipe that off. There we go. Get it all over my hand. By the nature of what we've made, we've got a small pouch with lots of bits of leather all pointing in different directions, trying to bend the leather in ways that we don't really want it to. It's only with use that it's going to settle down. Leather is always tough to start with, and that's how we want it. We wouldn't have it any other way. Leather finds its own character, its own age. Don't force it, because you shorten the life. I do get asked by people, well, can you make it look distressed? And in truth, that's their job, not mine. I can make it. If you want it looking distressed, use it. Use it a lot. Put some mileage on it, put some life into it, and it will soon look loved, used and worn. Unless it's bridal, at which point it takes 20 odd years. So, we are done. All I'm going to do now, once that's dry, is add some beeswax and just polish up those edges. So, let me come back when this is dry and we will do that. And there we go. What do we think of that? That is sweet, isn't it? I really like that. I like this form of gusset. I like the surety that nothing can fall out. It adds a little bit of weatherproof to it if you are going to go in rough climates. It's not waterproof. It's never going to be, it's leather, it's going to get wet, but ultimately a little bit of weather resistance to it, certainly for what's inside. Now the proof of the pudding. It's snug, but it fits. We need to be strong. We need to ensure it does what we want it to do, and then we pull out, flap over, and again it's stiff, it's gonna be, but oh my goodness, look at that. How stunning is that little pouch? I like the loop. I prefer this, I think. And again, we've just done a single row stitching. You can stick a second row up there if you want to. You can extend it a little higher by making it longer. Add 10 centimetres to what's in the pack. It's all about choice. The idea is you get the pack, you get the dimensions, make it your own. Do with it what you will. Have fun, but practice. That's the main thing. Get some practice in with it. So we have there two, we have, and we can see there that that's going to sit very flat against the body. That's going to sit a little proud. Brilliant for bulky clothing. Both do exactly the same job, yet both look very different. We've got this lovely row of stitching around the base here. We've got 2 rows of stitching here and this lovely rounding bottom going on there. Folks, see what you think. Play with it. Make of it what you will. I like it. I enjoyed making that. I like these little pouches. I like the gussets. I like the detail that you can add to it. If you're a tooler and that's your thing, then you've got plenty of space on there that you can start adding your tooling to if you so wish. Again, you make it your own, but ultimately that little pouch works a dream. And already, just after one sort of use of putting the tin in, taking the tin out, it's already beginning to form to the tin, and that's what we want. And you need to leave it in there for a while. Let the leather soak up the moisture in the atmosphere. Take it out, get it used. The more you use it, the better it will be. But that is the 1 ounce tin full gusset pouch. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you have lots and lots of fun making it. We will then look at the 2 ounce tin. But for now, go and enjoy these. Take care. Thanks for watching.